Good morning, everyone. Pleased everyone found the room. I'm Darcey O'Callaghan, the International Policy Director at Food and Water Watch. I just want to start by acknowledging Don Cooney, who was one of my first professors at Western Michigan University, who really radicalized me 20 years ago.
Well done.
So I think he's a big part of why I'm here today. So Food and Water Watch really started as a consumer rights organization because we were a project at Public Citizen, which of course is the great consumer organization based in DC, founded by Ralph Nader. So we have been pulled further into the climate justice movement because of our great organizing at the grassroots level with communities who were fighting water issues. So extraction by Nestle, for example. We just had a huge victory this week when a ballot initiative in Oregon, after a 7-year campaign, finally stopped Nestle's plan to extract water for bottling. And so because we really emphasize working with the grassroots, half of our organization are actually community organizers based in 16 offices around the US. Our model is to work on local issues with local groups and then explicitly tie those campaigns into national campaigns and national legislation, which are then informed by our global viewpoint. So part of my job is bringing that global viewpoint and making sure that our work parallels what our allies are doing around the world. So as we worked with so many of these local groups on water issues, like the Nestle campaign or like other groups who were fighting against privatization of municipal water systems, we got pulled further and further into the fracking fights. Now our allies said you have to work on this issue because it's contaminating our water, it's polluting our air, it's hurting our communities in so many ways. And at first, we thought, how on earth can we fight the oil and gas industry? This isn't winnable. And we try to be strategic, so we want to take on campaigns that are winnable. But the more we broke it down, the more we realized that if we started at the small level through local bans and building a movement at the grassroots level, we could then parlay that into statewide bans. My colleague Eric is here from our Brooklyn office, and he was very essential to the ban that we won in New York State. So our work on fracking then led us further into climate change. Now, this is, I think one of the benefits of the fact that we have worked so closely at the grassroots level in local communities and making sure that we understood local issues has allowed us to play a sort of unique role with national organizations. And so we felt it was very important to go to Paris because so much of the attention on climate change has been about carbon and coal plants. And we were concerned that the methane emissions from fracking were actually getting ignored. And if you look at the IPCC statistics, it shows you that methane is actually 87 times more powerful of a greenhouse gas toxin than carbon is. Now that's over a 20-year period. So if you want to look at 100 years out, then carbon should be your target. But if you are very concerned about climate change, then you know that what we need to do has got to happen in the next 20 years. Which means we need to be looking more intensively at methane emissions. And the problem with fracking is that because of things like the Halliburton loophole, which allowed exemption of the industry from the Safe Water Drinking Act, they didn't have to disclose what chemicals were being used in the fracking process. And so it made it very difficult to actually be documenting the health impacts of fracking. But as time goes on, more and more studies have come out and more academics have been able to get around some of these policy challenges. So we went to Paris to raise the profile of the problems of fracking and the methane emissions. Kevin Anderson was one of the great academics who showed up to our global fracking summit. We had over 100 folks from around the planet there talking about their local campaigns, everywhere from Thailand to China to Argentina and Mexico, and of course all over Europe, where they've had a number of fantastic wins. So, you know, these fights are not going to slow anytime soon. We have parlayed our fracking victories into looking more broadly at infrastructure and pipeline fights. There was just a recent win in New York. There are a number of fights happening across New Jersey. There's a pipeline running from Texas into Mexico, so we're doing some cross-border organizing there. And we've used this work to build relationships with a lot of the groups that have been doing long-time organizing against the extractive industries. The faith community has been a huge help in that sector, particularly in Latin America. So one of our other big concerns in Paris was, of course, about the false solutions. And you know, we put fracking into that category of a false solution because the broader theory is that, well, you know, fracking is a stepping stone towards transitioning to a renewable energy economy, and we know that's not the case. So, you know, along with fracking, some of the other terrible false solutions that we saw come out of the agreement were things like carbon capture and storage, and this broader idea that technology will save us. And yet those technologies aren't even fully developed yet. So we have some real concerns with how that will go, and of course it falls into the neoliberal paradigm of you know, using market mechanisms to solve all of our social and environmental challenges. So another way that Food and Water Watch is fighting some of these false solutions, in addition to things like CCS, and carbon trading, cap and trade, fighting some of the challenges in the California trading system that's been put in place, offsets, is that now we're seeing, particularly in the US, that there's a move towards using a cap and trade system for water pollution. So because we've got these dead zones that are emerging or have been building for a very long time in water basins around the US, most of that is runoff from corporate agriculture. So the theory, because politicians, in my opinion, have not been strong enough and forward-thinking enough to do the hard work of regulating these agricultural emissions, is that they've tried to use market mechanisms like cap and trade for water to do the tough work for them, thinking that, well, if we can get the buy-in from the corporate sector, this will be an easier reduction of emissions. And the reality is that it's not working. So that's another area where we're trying to raise the red flag, because we've only seen it discussed in Scandinavia in terms of presenting cap and trade for water, but it's now happening in several watersheds across the US. How many people saw the movie The Big Short? Scary, right?
Excellent.
Great movie, super scary. You know, I don't know if you saw the postscript at the end about how Michael Burry, who was, of course, the investor who foresaw the collapse of the housing market, the only thing he's investing now is water. So, you know, for us, that is a clarion call, and we need to be very concerned about trying to stop some of these trading schemes for water. So, you know, because our work, specifically in fracking, has been more successful than we ever imagined, and because there's been such a growing movement across the US and across the world to stop it, we really think that within the next 5 to 10 years, we're going to see real victories in the form of a national ban in the US. And so we're starting to do the forward-thinking work over what comes next. So if we win a national fracking ban, what do we transition into? And so that's pulling us further into issues of...
Can we take a vacation?
Yeah, we're gonna all take a really long vacation and celebrate. And then we're gonna come back and work a little bit harder on renewables. So I've seen this trend, I think, pretty broadly across the U.S. climate justice movement, that, you know, we're all saying on one hand we have to fight the good fight and criticize the things we don't want to see in our economy, but we also have to build up the alternatives. And certainly more research needs to be done, but we need the government to be putting more money into research and development for renewables, and we need the policies at the local level that will encourage more investment in solar and wind and geothermal and the actual sustainable energy sources that we're essentially going to have to transition into. There's no choice. The only choice is how soon we'll do it and how many people will get hurt before we do a proper transition. So my final comment is to call on all of you to attend the March for a Clean Energy Revolution, which is going to take place on July 24th. It's a Sunday just before the national, there's the flyer, there's more flyers by the door, you can go to the website. It's going to take place the day before the National Democratic Convention, because we want to really be bringing this issue of the need to a proper and just transition to policymakers. So I'll leave it at that. Thanks.